I was in a training this week, and I heard the phrase, the expression, maybe you've heard it, the phrase, fill your cup, fill your cup. This is a phrase that I feel like is roughly in the genre of the self-care practices whole thing. I've heard this phrase many times, and I've never quite understood exactly what it meant. It's kind of like, for me at least, the phrase self-care in general, like what does that mean? What are we getting at? Anyway, this time was a little bit different because I heard a really, really good explanation of this phrase, fill your cup. It was explained by Rachel Gonzalez-Levy, and she started with a contrast, saying some things fill your cup and other things spill your cup. So things that fill your cup are things that give you energy. Time passes quickly when you do them. You enjoy them, you feel like they matter, they give you a sense of identity, and you want to do these things more often. Now, the things that spill your cup, they fill you with dread. You tend to procrastinate them. They're things that take you away from your goals. And so the idea is simple. You want to do more things that fill your cup and fewer things that spill your cup. I'm very fortunate. In the regular course of the things that I do, I get to do a lot of things that fill my cup. And one of them is teaching our adult education classes. They're so energizing for me. Time absolutely flies from beginning to end. I continue to refine the schedule of when I teach so I can teach more often at times that work for more people in the community. Teaching in this format gives me a strong sense of identity as a teacher of Torah, a facilitator of Jewish learning. And those of us who study education of any type know you can't separate teaching from learning. Jewish tradition absolutely recognizes this, and every time I teach, I learn, and all of that fills my cup. Our learning every week fills my cup, but our learning this week touched me in a particular way. Our Parashat this week is Parashat Tisa. It contains one of my favorite stories in Torah about Aaron, the priest. So Aaron is known as Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom, a lover of peace and a pursuer of peace. But in this week's parasha, Aaron has to do something that's a little bit out of his wheelhouse. He has to lead and supervise the people while Moses is gone. He's on Mount Sinai with God receiving the 10 Commandments, and Aaron basically has to cover for him. Of course, this doesn't go well. We end up with a golden calf. So this is the part that is really my favorite part of the story about Aaron. Right around chapter 32, verse 21, if you want to follow along in your Chumashim, we have this conversation between Moses and Aaron. Moses has just returned, he's seen the chaos that's unfolding, and he essentially asks Aaron, what in tarnation has happened here? Aaron fumbles to explain himself, and he says, starting with verse 22, "Let not my Lord be enraged, Moses. You know that this people is bent on evil. They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us.' For that man, Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." So I said to them, said Aaron, "Whoever has gold, take it off." They gave it to me, I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf. I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf. Now perhaps, at least one person, perhaps one person besides me has seen the 1994 movie Clerks, kind of a cult classic. So the main character has to cover for someone who's out sick at work, and all this crazy stuff goes down. And he keeps saying throughout the movie, "I'm not even supposed to be here today." And this is what Aaron is saying. It's so relatable. Aaron can't possibly be at fault. He wasn't even supposed to be here today. This is Moses' job. He can't possibly be responsible for what happened. I love this story of Aaron. I read it as a moment of comedy. But in this week in our weekly warm-up Torah study, we asked some questions, we had some discussion that led me to see this story from a completely different perspective. The question asked essentially was, well, this did happen on Aaron's watch, so how was Aaron held accountable, if at all? Did God hold him accountable? Did Moses hold him accountable? And what were the consequences for Aaron of this entire episode? So first we looked more at Moses' words and actions right at that same part of the story where Aaron articulates his absurd denial of responsibility. Moses initially asks Aaron in verse 21, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such great sin upon them?" Here, Moses is holding both Aaron and the people accountable, or at least suggesting that the people be held accountable, but clearly Aaron is the party more at fault. And Aaron responds, "You know this people is bent on evil," implying that if they weren't, none of this would have happened. Okay, perhaps that's true, but we read in verse 25, Moses saw that the people were out of control since Aaron had let them get out of control. They were a menace to any who might oppose them. Now, in our weekly warm-up Torah class, we talked about this moment for Aaron, this moment of failed leadership. One of the participants in the class brought the example of a teacher in a classroom. Now, this is a leadership scenario in which things can get out of control. All of us who have been students in school know some teachers and some classes are in control, and others aren't. As we studied this story, we had compassion for Aaron. After all, if Moses was the real teacher of the class, so to speak, maybe Aaron was just the teacher's aide. It wasn't Aaron's usual responsibility to keep control. So, in this moment of further heightened fear, with the people in the middle of the wilderness and their leader disappears, of course things got out of control. For me, this year, thanks to our weekly warm-up Torah class, this was the first time I'd ever studied so closely how Aaron was at fault. We had this class on Thursday morning. This is just 2 days ago. It's been a pretty busy 2 days for us here at Adat Shalom, but this question of how Aaron was at fault and what Aaron might have done differently has been steadily percolating in a corner of my thought bubble as I've been going around tending to everything else. I find myself with such compassion for Aaron. What could he have done? What should he have done? Earlier in our Parashat, chapter 32, verse 1, we read the actual narrative of what happened with Aaron and the people, before we get to the part of the story where Aaron's explaining himself. We read, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." I read this and I think, that must have been terrifying for Aaron. He's all alone without Moses, and the people are gathering against him. He must have been afraid for his safety. But Aaron says to them in verse 2, "Take off your gold rings and bring them to me." Aaron takes them and casts them into a mold, and Aaron makes the gold into a molten calf. The people exclaim, "This is your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And then Aaron actually builds an altar so the Jewish people can engage in idol worship. So where exactly did things go wrong? I think of Aaron's statement to Moses in verse 22, "You know this people is bent on evil." I think about Aaron worried for his safety, and I have such compassion. And I've been racking my brain for 2 days thinking, what could Aaron have done to prevent his failure in leadership? And this question has led me to consider leadership in a whole new way. And I think of any of us who have had any leadership responsibilities at all, whether in the workplace, in the community, or of course the time-honored leadership role known as parenting, is aware that there are some real limitations when you try to tell people what to do. I'll never forget a story I heard of a father at shul with his young son, and the father is trying to get the son to use the restroom. The father says in joking exasperation, "This is like negotiating with terrorists." Leaders face real limitations in telling people what to do. And Aaron was an Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom. He loved peace and pursued peace. He surely wouldn't want things to get violent. So what could he have done? Thinking of Aaron's struggle made me realize anew, leadership is an act of service. Communities of humankind throughout time have needed leaders to inspire, guide, and unite. And some communities, of course, are easier to lead than others. We know that we as Jews are a stiff-necked people. In general, I think that's a great asset of ours. But it didn't make Aaron's job any easier. It was his duty to keep the people on the right path, even though they might have been bent on evil. Aaron could have said, Aaron perhaps should have said, "I know Moses is long in coming down the mountain. I too don't know what happened to him." And I am not making a molten God who shall go before you. For our God, the one God, not Moses, God brought us out of the land of Egypt. Our God is beyond seeing, beyond hearing, beyond a statue of gold. I cannot and will not allow you, Aaron could have said, to be bent on evil. This is not happening. Leadership is an act of service. It's an act of service to look at a person or at a people that is bent on evil and tell them no. It's an act of service to look at a person or a people that is straying in the wrong direction and point that out to them and say to them, this is not what you should be doing. This is not acceptable. This is an act of service because in essence it is selfless. The leader puts himself at risk for the benefit of the people and must trust his instinct and judgment to know that it's the right thing to do, even when everyone around him says otherwise. But let's not let our thoughts wander too far towards perfection. We turn back to our parasha. We read about Moses in chapter 32, verse 19. When Moses returned to the camp, when Moses saw the calf and the idol worship, Moses became enraged. He lost it. He had a serious meltdown. He takes the precious tablets with God's commandments inscribed upon them, and he hurls them to the ground, the exact same action that Aaron took when he hurled the gold into the fire. And Moses takes the golden calf, grinds it into powder, and scatters the powder upon the Israelites' drinking water, so they truly cannot avoid this reminder of their sin. Another one of my students in my weekly warm-up Torah class, as we read these verses during our learning, pointed out, Moses and Aaron were the best that the Jewish people had to offer as far as leaders go. If this is the best we can do, what does that say about the Jewish people, and what does that say about humankind? Indeed, our parasha ends with a profound story of second chances. After things with the Jewish people calm down, God instructs Moses to try again to come up to the mountain and go back with the tablets in hand. And as Moses is starting up the mountain, God proclaims, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim b'Rav Chesed ve'emet, Notzer Chesed la'alafim, Nosei Avon v'Feshe v'Chata'a v'Nakeh. The Lord, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the thousandth generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. The real message of the parasha, my students suggested, is that we will make mistakes at every level of leadership, and we can count on God to forgive, even and especially when we are afraid that no one else will. As we move together through this Shabbat and into this new week, may we hold ourselves with compassion as we remember that no matter our station in life, we'll make mistakes. May we step into our moments of leadership with strength and with awareness of our responsibility to speak out against evil, no matter our fears. And finally, as we meet life's challenges, may we find ways to fill our cup, to do things we enjoy, to do things that provide us a sense of identity, to do things that matter. Shabbat Shalom.